Welcome to Raise Awareness. This is the cable show dedicated to highlighting the work that the North Andover Public Schools and our collaboration with the community do. Today's show is going to feature anxiety strategies for parents in the home. My name is Dr. Donna and I'm the Assistant Superintendent of Student Services. Our guests today will include Nikki Murphy, who is the Director of Social Emotional Learning. Nikki is a licensed psychotherapist practicing for almost 20 years in inpatient psychiatric, outpatient mental health, and predominantly private practice settings. Liza Sandow is a licensed independent clinical social worker and former elementary and middle school teacher. She has worked in clinically and community-based outpatient therapy, CBAT, residential educational treatment settings prior to coming to North Andover Public Schools. We also welcome Michelle O'Leary. She is also a licensed school psychologist with over 15 years of experience in public schools with the middle, elementary, and high school populations, as well as serving as a camp counselor, a site director for camps for students with social and emotional needs. And finally, we have Tom DeStefano. He is a licensed mental health counselor for 12 years. Recently, he became a school adjustment counselor in North Andover Public Schools and has provided counseling in residential treatment facilities, home-based and outreach counseling in collaboration with DCF, DMH, as well as private practice. This cable show is dedicated to strategies that parents will be able to utilize within their home and understanding how to recognize anxiety within their children. Our previous show included elements of work that we conduct within our schools in programs for students at the elementary, middle, and high school levels. So today, for example, we're going to discuss things like the definition of anxiety, separation anxiety, school phobia, and suggest some strategies to help regulate your emotions. With that, what I'd like to do is turn it over to Nikki Murphy. If you could give us a little bit of background of some of the conversation we had previously and what we might expect in today's show.
Sure. If you could go to the first slide, please, Bill. And the second slide. So briefly, what we'd like to talk about for parents is a little bit about anxiety and its definition. I think something that's important for parents to know is that what we want to talk about today are strategies that will help all children with anxiety, not just children with anxiety disorders. We all experience anxiety at different times in our life, and we aren't diagnosed with an anxiety disorder unless it's something that really is affecting your child's ability to function either at school or socially. You can kind of think of anxiety in some ways as a learning disability because it inhibits learning in a lot of different ways. It affects working memory and other executive functions, issues with organizing and planning, and sometimes can affect a child's ability to function well in the school setting. Could you go to the next slide, please? So social emotional learning is a process of acquiring and applying the knowledge, skills, and attitudes related to these 5 core competency areas. In North Andover, what we're trying to do is help kids acquire skills in these 5 areas. And anxiety and the skills to cope with anxiety are most related to self-management and self-awareness. So self-management, for example, is the ability for a child to manage their emotions and behaviors to help them achieve their goals, whether they're social goals, academic goals. But in order to be able to do that, they also need to be very self-aware, because they need to be able to identify what they're feeling. And anxiety is a feeling that we all have, like I said, but children often don't know how to identify their feelings at an early age. Next slide. So here's a list of just some anxiety symptoms and behaviors, and we wanted to talk about this just very briefly because what I think is important for parents to know is that we often think of anxiety as something that's internal, it's a feeling that somebody has, but it actually manifests sometimes in certain behaviors. And those behaviors can look very different depending on the child's age, depending on how significant the anxiety is. And so in order to really understand anxiety in your child and what to do, sometimes you need to understand that the behaviors might look aggressive, they might complain of physical, ailments, somatic complaints we call them, which are feelings of nausea, headaches, that kind of stuff. And anxiety can affect their schooling. They can become absent. They can refuse to socialize. So sometimes it looks what we call very behavioral. But in fact, what's motivating some of those behaviors is the feelings of anxiety that they have. And you can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so we'll go to this after.
Okay, so we'll save that slide for later, if we could. So actually, anxiety can be different based on the developmental age of children. And I think what a nice idea would be is if we could kind of take a few minutes and really represent what anxiety may look like or how it may manifest itself at the different age levels. And Liza, since you work with the youngest students in our district, perhaps you could start by describing what parents might recognize within the home.
Certainly. So for the younger kids in North Andover schools, anxiety often can look like inattention. It can manifest itself with kids being really hyperactive. It can also look like withdrawing. Kids might pull a sweatshirt up over their head or want to be in bed a lot or under the, in a small corner somewhere. And sometimes when kids get really anxious, they can also act out, and they can end up yelling or screaming or throwing things, banging on a wall. It can really run the gamut as to what it looks like. And so that's where, having conversations with your kids comes in to find out kind of what's one layer underneath, because it really can look a lot of different ways, and having conversations with your child is really one of the best ways to figure out what's actually behind it and what their child's anxiety looks like.
So would you say that in some cases perhaps children don't even realize they're experiencing anxiety at a young age, that they don't understand what's happening internally?
Absolutely. Learning to identify feelings is something that's really important for all people, and especially younger kids when they're just getting to know themselves. And when parents can help them do that, that's a big key in working with their anxiety.
And I'm guessing also that parents have a hard time recognizing that children too. They have busy days, they're working, they're cooking dinner, and all they're seeing is manifesting as perhaps their child is misbehaving. Mm-hmm. So helping parents understand how to recognize those things and help their child recognize them might be a good idea.
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you. So you're at the middle school level, Michelle, and we know with child development, any number of things can look different as they're growing and maturing on the spectrum area. Can you tell us a little bit about what you might see if you have a middle school child?
Sure. So, middle school's 3 of the toughest developmental times of any child's life.
Absolutely.
And their emotions are all over the place. Hormones are starting to take part in life. So it can be a challenge for kids, and socially it's a really difficult time as well. And a lot of what has already been shared also transfers to the middle school, but it still comes out differently. For example, a child that may have hidden their hoodie back in elementary school, that child may instead be hiding in their bed in the morning, and the parents can't get them out of bed. So there's still that avoidance piece, the withdrawal piece. There could be the aggression, there could be the yelling and the screaming, and so it once again runs the gamut. But as they're now middle schoolers versus elementary schoolers, some of the behavior, as Nikki was talking earlier, a lot of it looks like behavior. Some of that behavior they understand is not necessarily middle school behavior, so they go to different things. And for some kids, it's if you have this child who always played on the baseball team, played t-ball, and now they're at the middle school level and they're backing off of all their sports. They're not playing, they're not joining in after-school activities, and that could be their withdrawal from the social scene because it's too overwhelming for them. So it's a lot of the same idea, but at the next developmental level, it can be seen as different.
And would you also say that at that age that they don't necessarily recognize that what they're feeling is anxiety, or they're anxious about their peer groups? Yeah. Have they learned those attributes of themselves yet necessarily?
Yeah, working at the middle school, you see a little of each, because you definitely see the kids that don't understand what's typical, what's normal anxiety, and And entering a class for the first time causes all of us to feel nervous.
Sure.
And that's not an anxiety disorder necessarily, but the students that are really unable to function on a daily basis, whether it's in school, out of school, those are the students that really are manifesting a true anxiety disorder. You know, there's a lot that comes into play at that stage of life and at that level of schooling that can really increase, you know, any feelings of nervousness and anxiety. It's just about what's sort of the typical and what's above and beyond.
And we could see it manifest itself in both school setting, community setting, and certainly in the home. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things that we'll see at home is kids that are sleeping too much or their sleeping patterns are erratic. So there are some students that will stay up all night worried about a test the next day, or you know, a social situation that's coming up, and then the parents can't get them up in the morning.
Right.
And so, you know, sleeping can be erratic. In school, the first line of defense has always been the nurse's office, you know, and students will take, and I'm sure you see that at elementary school too, students will take frequent trips to the nurse or check in with their guidance counselor regularly.
Sure.
So, you know, it can show itself in a number of different ways.
Great, thank you. And Tom, that leaves you. You have our oldest kids in the high school. Can you tell us a little bit about what that might look like?
Of course. I want to start with a statistic that the National Institute of Mental Health showed that anxiety is now the #1 mental health disorder.
Wow.
From teens up into adulthood. It's overtaken depression, which is pretty significant. At the high school level, similar to what Michelle had talked about, and Liz as well, with some of the behaviors, but we see it a lot more with their withdrawing. Children seem to withdraw more. The teens, they're not, you know, parents are going to have to really seek them out and try to find out what's going on. It may be hidden. They might notice things like their grades are dropping, behavioral problems. Maybe they're turning to substances at that time. In addition to that, there's other physical symptoms that might come out. Maybe they're sleeping more, like Michelle had mentioned, appetite changes, withdrawing from things that they've originally showed interests in. They're worrying more. Maybe there's nausea. So there's these type of things that come into play during this period of time.
And I would imagine for parents what compounds it is, certainly beginning at the middle school level, but certainly at the high school level. This is when our students and children start wanting to really identify, who am I as a person separate from my family and separate from my parents. So that probably compounds a parent's ability to recognize what's actually happening.
I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, identity is certainly a developmental stage that's happening at that level. And in addition to that, with identity, what's becoming more of a problem, where anxiety's becoming the issue, is the social media and screen time. So,
excellent point.
Yes. Lots of times when teens log on, let's say, to one of these big, one of the big social media
without advertising anyway.
That's what I'm trying to be careful.
Platforms,
thank you. They're watching these kids, they're watching their peers, project the highlights of their life, and they're not really getting an idea of the behind the scenes footage that's really happening. So everything's so out there, and all the great things that happen, other kids saying, wow, I have to live up to that potential. So that's been a problem. I want to touch upon that a little bit further, Donna, because
Sure.
teens aren't getting any time to really be alone. They're not having any alone time anymore, to take some time to step away. It's school, it's the computer, it's video games, it's constantly in their face. And another study suggested, who was this by? This was by Common Sense Media in 2015, that teens aged 13 to 18 are spending 9 hours a day on screen time. So anywhere from video games to using their cell phones. They're also lacking the face-to-face interactions these days. So they're not, having that social interaction with a peer at a park or at their house. Everything's done through texting. So that seems to influence the social anxiety. Another piece is, when it comes to the media, this type of media platform, is things are already done for them. In other words, they can get directions to where they're going. They know who's going to be at a party or a restaurant before they show up. So that's taking away from that ability to step in and problem solve on the fly. So when you know who's already there, you can withdraw, and it makes it easier for them, but it's also impacting their anxiety. And the last piece is the cyberbullying, where that clearly is affecting the victim, and they can't get away from it. The bullying's happening at school, the bullying's happening, you know, when they're home. So those type of things are definitely happening more at the high school level than other areas.
And that's something we've seen a huge increase in. Donna and I were just speaking about this earlier with the cyberbullying, because when we were younger, you could go home and you could be safe. So if you were bullied at school, you had sort of a safe space to get away from it, to take a break. But now the bullying follows them into the home, and there really is no safe place for them. And because they're always online or on their phones, you know, as kids, that's normal in this day and age. They tend to bring that bullying home with them and not be able to feel safe. Yeah, which increases their anxiety, obviously.
Right. And it's also limiting their capacity and their growth potential for really learning how to engage with each other, how to have eye contact, how to have those difficult conversations with each other. I mean, even to the point where I've heard students are dating and then they break up with each other over a text, which I can only imagine, one, the impact on the social development of that for both children, and two, the impact of receiving a text like that as the person who's being now rejected, and you have no outlet or no way to even respond to it or have a conversation about it. So would you say that's limiting their development in that area as well?
Absolutely, and I'll go as far as saying, sitting down with students and counseling, you know, I have to have them be clear what talking means. For the longest time, it's like I was talking to a friend and I'm thinking face to face, where no, it could be talking means texting, talking means over the microphone playing a video game, you know, talking means through social media. So it's certainly an issue that's influencing the anxiety.
And it's taken away our capacity to cope as well, you know. So I think about when we were in, you know, when I was a child and first day of school, we just show up, and whoever happens to be in our class, besides maybe a few close friends if we found out whatever teacher they had.
That's true.
Whereas now, you know, everyone's on different platforms saying, who has so-and-so? So students are walking into the class already knowing if they have certain friends, if, you know, who's already going to be in there as a support, which is really nice in a lot of ways, but it's also taking away that that challenge to the students to cope.
Good
and
point.
even getting directions, you know, being lost, I'm sure has made everyone here anxious at some point in our lives.
Yes.
But when you have everything at your fingertips, there's a lot of things that we no longer have to cope with. It just is already there for us.
Absolutely.
And it's, you know, it's like you don't work out, you're not going to have the muscles. I mean, it's something that unfortunately we end up losing if we just don't have that capacity to exercise the skill.
So I think what we should think about discussing now is, if I'm a parent sitting at home and I'm hearing, you know, what some of these symptoms might look like and how I might recognize these in my child, what can I do as a parent at home to maybe recognize what's happening to my child, help them recognize what's happening to them, regulate their emotions? So what are some strategies that a parent can maybe apply in their home? Maybe Liz, we can start with you and talk about it at the young age.
So Tom was talking about how, you know, high school is really a time for identity formation. Elementary school is really kind of the first chance kids have to see themselves as individual beings. The first, you know, in a big environment for a long day, and figuring out how to handle that.
Sure.
And parents see them on both ends of that. And it's really kind of crucial for parents to have these strategies, so I'm glad we're doing this. Going back to what we were saying earlier about emotional identification is really huge, especially for younger kids. And can we put up the slide with the feelings faces? So this is an example of what we call a feeling faces chart. You can just find them online and do a quick search, and you come up with many, many options. This is one I use with elementary school students frequently, and I'll show them the chart when kids are a little off, either kind of fast moving, they're starting to have big reactions, or really withdraw. I'll put the chart in front of them and say, okay, what are, one or two or three of these that you're feeling right now? Or which face do you feel like right now? And they can really figure out, from the faces more than the words, especially at the elementary level, and then
Sure.
working with them to help identify, okay, when you feel like this, when this situation is similar to the one you have right now, and you get this same feeling, that's anxiety. That's what that means. And really walking kids through the learning process of their emotions and building that emotional language.
So really taking a deep breath and thinking, okay, I'm feeling this way. Why am I feeling this way? And for little ones, you could actually have that chart so that they could look at it and point to it and say, okay, this is how I'm feeling.
Absolutely.
And then what would a next step be for a parent? Once a child says, I'm feeling really scared.
Right, so the deep breath you just mentioned is a good one.
Yep.
Taking deep breaths it changes how your brain works on a neurological level. But one of the things that really, really helps everyone, and especially young kids, is knowing that there's a consistent plan that they can rely on, knowing what to expect. So when kids are either able to identify that they're feeling nervous or scared about a situation, whatever it is, being able to say, okay, well, let's figure out what's going to happen. Let's talk it through. If they're nervous about something at school the next day, talk that through the evening before, and then even the morning before they go to school, so that they feel solid in the plan.
So now you're increasing their capacity to have socialization with the parent. So that's practicing that skill,
Absolutely.
practicing that eye contact, and then practicing recognizing my emotion.
Absolutely.
And then the next step is, what are my strategies to regulate that emotion when I feel it, right?
Right, exactly.
And does the
So
same strategy work for all students?
it doesn't, and it often doesn't work for the same student, sometimes day to day, often week to week. But deep breaths, I do a lot of mindfulness, so a lot of either listening to calm music, noticing how you feel in different parts of your body. I like to phrase it as, where do you feel your energy?
Okay.
And I often separate out how they're feeling in their brain and how they're feeling in their bodies, and being able to point to or color on a picture where their energy is. And when energy is really, really up, oftentimes people's first thought is, oh, you need to do a calm activity because I want you to be calm.
Right.
And really, when people's energy is very high, sometimes you need to do a very energetic activity in order to then help them regulate their energy. So sometimes kids like to do jumping jacks or skip around the room. If kids need a little bit more quiet time, or they're feeling kind of on the lower end, on the more withdrawn end, sometimes I'll put on calming music and have them take a quiet minute or two, and then slowly kind of increase the volume of the music and start a conversation.
So we have a few minutes left. So I think it's important if we can focus at the middle school level and then the high school level too, because I'm sure it's a little similar, but also a little bit different. So, Michelle?
Sure, and a lot of what you've already touched on, we can utilize at the middle school as well, as the mindfulness and just finding whether it's just using the senses, listening to music. We do a lot with just, fidgets and all of that, distraction. I think one point I want to make for parents is we're very used to solving our children's problems. That's what we do as parents. And so a lot of times when a child comes home and says, I'm really worried about X, Y, and Z, our first reaction is to say, you don't need to worry about that, you're fine, you're really this or you're really that, which feels like the most natural thing to do. But when we hear the child saying that, we really need to stop, take a second and say, well, what is it about that? A lot of anxiety is an all or nothing thought process, and one thing I really like to do with my students is help them break it down. So when they come into me and say, everyone hates me, well, let's talk about that. Where are you having success socially? And then they start to talk about, well, I have friends in this class, I have friends in that class. And as we break it down, we're able to get a little more to the root, which helps us then identify, well, what's going to be the best way to manage this. So I think that's a really important piece for parents that they can do, you know, regularly with their children, listen, and then help them break it down. Just guide them instead of we try to solve them too quickly. I think.
That's a fabulous idea, and that helps them engage in a conversation. It helps them with problem solving, and it helps them recognize their emotions. And so, Tom, can you tell us about the high school
Very
level?
similar to what Michelle's saying too, but for a parent out there, be calm, communicate. You don't know what's going on. Maybe it's not anxiety what's going on. So if you're going to, you know, jump in and assume things, you know, that might not be the best approach with your son or daughter.
That's a good point too, because not everything is anxiety.
Not everything is anxiety. So be calm, communicate, don't judge what's going on, be a helper, be a listener. It's hard to make a relationship with your teenage son or daughter. So maybe, you know, finding their interest in building that relationship there. But to what you were saying too, we also as parents, we want to fix problems.
Yes.
That's not the best approach either, especially when it comes to teens. Parents are doing a lot. You know, they're calling their teachers. They're trying to figure out, you know, what's going on in their lives and problem solve for them, and the kids aren't learning anything. So step back, give them maybe 1 or 2 steps to do. So if they're struggling with maybe a social piece with their anxiety, say, I got an idea. Why don't you raise your hand 1 time in your class? Why don't you make eye contact with 3 people today? So give them small chunks to do. And if you don't have the answers, there's plenty of other resources to reach out to. I know reaching out to counselors just to talk at the school, we can give you the direction that you need to help there. So there's plenty of resources.
The parent's reaction, I think, is so key. Because when a child says to you, like you said, you know, I'm anxious or I'm worried about something, if a parent's struggle with self-management themselves, right, and their anxiety level now rises, they do a number of things. They overreact, they say, oh my God, what's wrong with my kid, or they try to fix it. So their reaction, their ability to self-manage their own anxiety is key. And then the language they use is key. You know, if you say immediately, like, well, that sounds like you're anxious, or what should we do? You know, maybe you shouldn't go to school, and those kind of things. That's going to escalate the situation versus remaining calm, asking questions, and really trying to determine what is the actual problem. Is it just normal anxiety, and we're just going to problem solve together and figure out a solution? I think that's really important.
So I can tell we're all incredibly passionate and knowledgeable about this topic, and there's just so many more areas that I would love to delve into with all of you. Unfortunately, we're running out of time, and we can certainly meet again and have some further conversations if we receive some feedback from parents about specific areas that they might be interested in. But I think what I would like to point out as we close is that we do have a website that we've developed that's part of the North Andover Public Schools website. Maybe Nikki, you can tell us a little bit about it, because I know you've created it with some strategies that parents can reach out to and look at. I believe we could put that on the screen.
We do. We have
well.
one more slide, the last slide. So you can go to, as a parent, you can go to the North Andover Public Schools website, and what you're going to see is a section that says departments, and you just click right down to the SEL department and click on that link. And when you click on that link, what's going to come up are all kinds of resources for parents. And there's, on the left-hand side, another place to click that says resources for families. Now that will have a list of all different kinds of resources for kids with anxiety. As a parent, how do you help your child with anxiety? There are things about depression, about handling grief and loss, trauma, etc. So there's a lot to that website, and you can click through and learn a lot about what we're doing in North Andover to address these issues and support kids with anxiety. It's a very good resource to use.
All right, great. Well, thank you very much. This has been absolutely wonderful and beneficial for information for our families. I want to thank my guests for joining us, and I want to thank our community for working with us. We look forward to producing more raise awareness shows for you in topics such as we'll be discussing autism, we'll be discussing some of the new reading and math initiatives, we'll be discussing collaboration that we have with the town, and we really look forward to providing you with much information. Thank you.